What is going on, everyone? Before we get into today's video, I want to give a big shout out to A1 Comics for A1 Wednesday. Don't forget to follow them on Instagram. Their link is in the description below. They have live sales every Wednesday and Friday on the IG. Don't forget to check them out on Twitch every Thursday as well. And of course, they are on the Whatnot app. I want to talk about grade validity.
Yeah.
And, again, this is something else that I talked some months back with Swagwahas. We had a good stream talking about this, but there's obviously a lot of talk and concern among content creators, just among people in forums and on social media within the hobby, that are, have valid concerns about the grading process. And for me, I question the lack of transparency from the grading process, especially from the big two, from CGC and CBCS. Okay. At least with CBCS, their grader notes are more available. So I think that adds more transparency. With CGC, you don't get them for free and they're not always there. Like, I've literally had books that came back 9.0s that had no grader notes. And I don't think I've ever had a book 9.4 and higher from CGC that have had grader notes. And again, I haven't submitted crazy amounts, but from my sample size, no book 4.0, 4.6, or excuse me, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, no grader notes at all. We finally did get a little video, I believe last year, released by CGC with the guy sitting there saying, this is kind of what we do. I personally don't think you scratch the surface. We also know that there is a huge gap between the value of a 9.6 and a 9.8. Yeah. And a lot of times I do think there's valid argument that sometimes you can't tell the difference between a 9.6 and a 9.8. And then there's the questionable times where, like, for me, I got back an Amazing Spider-Man book that had 5 spine ticks that color broke deeply, had a blended edge and some other flaws, and it came back at 9.8. What are your thoughts currently? Wow. And again, this isn't just CGC, you can focus on CGC or CBCS if you want to, but just in general for graded comics, what is your current thoughts on the state of grade validity?
Well, I'll just say before I go into this, I have paid memberships to both CBCS and CGC. So, they both get my money. And I've been a massive proponent, I can't talk tonight, sorry, of buying the book, not the grade, for years. I mean, I can think of at least 5 years back, and that's the way I was looking at it. Because you go to shows, and you're sitting there, you're staring at just walls of slabs, and hopefully you have the opportunity, if you're really hunting a book, to be able to compare and contrast multiple copies before you settle on one. If you're really fortunate, you can even get some that are, the same grade or, half a point plus or minus. And a lot of times I've seen books that are graded, they may be the lower grade of the book, but they present better than the higher grade book. And I think that's something that can be hard for people to understand, is that, if we want to go really philosophical here, grading is an art. It's not a science, right? It's opinion. It's not a formula you can just plug into any human being and get the exact same result every time, which is why we have 3 graders and their grades are averaged to actually assign the grade, right? Allegedly.
Yeah. Has anybody seen, that's another thing. Have we seen the process too? That's another big question, but go ahead, go on.
And maybe that's something, if we want to go down that rabbit hole briefly, maybe that's something we can learn from the toy industry, because I know I've seen toy companies where they'll actually provide sub-grades, right? So you'll have the bubble grade, the figure grade, and I think it's the card grade. And you actually see the metadata that goes into the overall grade. So maybe that's something that we could eventually incorporate into the comics world, where we could get a little more granular and have some insight, even if it's just grader 1 grade, grader 2 grade, what have you, right? But ultimately, when it comes down to it, it is definitely possible to have a lower grade book that looks better than a higher grade book, which is where a lot of this can come from. Whether it's, you've got a loose centerfold, whether it's at one staple or two, there are those defects that can happen that drop the grade, but don't drop the presentability of the book. On the other end, I think where I've seen some issues is the quality control after the grading. So like books that become damaged in encapsulation, right? Or damaged in transit. And I don't know how we're going to necessarily account for that, especially over the last couple of years where they've just been throwing bodies at the problem. So you've got people who clearly aren't fully trained that are just being thrown at it because we need warm bodies to move through this massive pile of work that's been dumped on us. So I suspect that we may see books that have been graded in the last couple of years for years down the line where the label says one thing, but you look at the book and it's clearly not that.
That's a good point too. And I want to make it known, like, recent CGC books, they're wiggling around in that.
In the rattle.
Yeah. So if, even if the UPS guy or whatever is just, having a field day, throwing them on the truck, throwing them on, it's like, so yeah, well, that's a whole nother question of grade validity, because we're not even talking about the validity of the graders looking at the book and assigning a grade, but does that sticker grade hold through time if the book is vulnerable to damages at that point?
I'm almost at the point where I have to kind of feel sorry for CGC, because so many of the problems of the last 5 years have been brought on by their own making. From Frankenslab, when we first got the updated holder where they were literally pressing the books between the two sheets of Mylar inside the inner well. Then they're like, okay, that doesn't work. That's damaging books. Holy Newton rings. So then we went back to an inner well, but it was still so tight on the encapsulation, everything was still having Newton rings. Now we've got rattly books. It's like we cannot seem to get this fixed to where the inner holder or the inner well and the outer well play nice to where it doesn't impact the presentation of the book on their end. Whereas I really like CBCS's new cases, but there's still a lot of hesitancy in the market with some people to really go after CBCS. So we've got ourselves in a pickle.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that one before the night is over for sure.
I figured
Bronze Age thoughts, grade validity, and we actually fleshed out kind of two different perspectives now to look at grade validity as well.
Yeah. So here's my thing, and this is my biggest point when it comes to grading, primarily with the big two, primarily with CGC and CBCS. There is no validity until there's more transparency. And except the one exception is how much validity we as a market assign. And so far, it surprises me how much blind faith we've still had, speaking generally as a market, in that validity. Here's my one thing about, I'll use CGC because Mark Nelson's the one that said this. Mark Nelson has made a comment at least a couple times now that CGC wants to grade and take into account known issues within a run for that particular issue of the comic book. Mm-hmm. And where I get caught up on that is, think about Marvel, which is, most of the market right now is Marvel. When you think about their paper, their coverless books, where it's basically an interior page that's used as a cover, bad quality paper. How come so many of those, if we're lucky, get a 9.8 when you've established the top end of that bell curve of what should be possible, but yet 9.8 still seems to be the cap of that? And even then, it's still hard to get those 9.8s when we know that almost every corner is going to have something. It doesn't happen every single time. Like, luckily, you sometimes get a good cut and you get that book out there. But it just seems like, I know this is something that you've talked about before, Chris. The difference between a 9.6 and a 9.8 sometimes is ephemeral. It doesn't really, it's not something that we can really see as the end user. And maybe in some cases that's because the book did shift around in the slab afterwards and the corner rubbed. But I don't really buy that, just from my own experience seeing brand new comic books and just kind of focusing on brand new comic books for a second. Those corners happen, and sometimes they get a 9.8 and sometimes they get a 9.6. And yes, it is a bit of an art form, but without that transparency piece that I brought up at the beginning, what I was talking about here, how am I supposed to know what my book's going to get? There is a little bit of hope involved, and you can be very careful and only submit books that you know are perfect, and you'll get those 9.8s that you're probably looking for in most cases with those modern books. But if the grading criteria is so wishy-washy, then what are we even doing? And again, primarily I'm speaking about CGC with that. CBCS at least does offer those grader notes for their books. But with CGC, every book below a 10 should have grader notes.
Agreed. 100%.
What went wrong?
Yep.
I need that transparency. I need to know more about what your process and what you guys say in an interview with an influencer or on social media. Show me the process. Show me the process behind the scenes once. A to Z. At least. I mean, that's the bare minimum that I need to feel fully confident in those grades. And until then, I'll only trust it as far as the market trusts it.
I like what both of you had to say, because I think, Drew, you brought the perspective of how the foundation of the industry should kind of be set, and then, Bronze Age, I feel you brought in that kind of playing the devil's advocate and saying, look, though, this is why I can't trust that foundation, so to say. So I like that nobody here is like either being extremely blind, saying, champion this because it's perfect, but then we're not over here, creating conspiracy theories and saying that CGC is manipulating the market because they're, purposely dwarfing the amount of 9.8s or giving more 9.8. And again, I'm not saying that happens or not, but we're not going to sit here and speculate on that right now. We're talking about the foundations of the grading industry and the grading process. In Bronze Age, I really do agree with you. I agree that it's not necessarily that the grades aren't valid, but we have every right to question them because we don't know. We can't validate them ourselves. So it's like, well, we just got to trust what they say, or we got to trust that it's because of this. We deserve, in my humble opinion, we deserve transparency. And I believe, at least with CGC, it does start with grader notes. I mean, grader notes, without doing anything else, are almost the foundation of transparency, because at least if a book gets a 9.8, you know exactly why. And I'm going to give an example here. And guys, I'm not using EGS as an example to say they're better than anyone else. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. And EGS 9.8 gets the grader's note of corner scuff top, bottom left front cover. Oh, corner scuff, top and bottom of the front left cover. So it just means that on the top and bottom of the spine, there's a little bit of scuff on both ends. So that could have happened like in the shipment process or whatnot, got a little rub, but and that's what really separates the 9.9s and the 10s. I think people argue, well, why aren't more books 9.9s or 10s? Look, I'm not going to argue that personally, because I think you got to understand, I think the 9.9s and the 10s are really come down to maybe a dull cut, or if they're shipped appropriately from Diamond and they they weren't thrown around by UPS, whatever. But I know at least with this why it got a 9.8. There's a lot more they can do, in my opinion, than grader notes, but it starts there. So let me ask you this, and then we'll go backwards. Bronze Age, I'll ask you this, and then Drew, I want you to answer this too.
Sure.
So kind of coming back around, do you feel that CGC, and now we are focused on CGC, do you think CGC is not pushing grader notes because they are, in a sense, maybe too comfortable? I don't want to use the terms cocky or ego, or too egotistical. I don't want to go that far, but
complacent.
Do you feel that at least, when the executives get together and they're looking at how, their business model, do you feel that maybe it's just, well, we can consolidate our resources. We could save money and not allocate resources for grader notes for every books because we can, because there's already that perception on the market. Do you think maybe that's kind of what's going on, or do you think it's something completely different?
Yeah, I think a bit of that ties into something that, especially when people share their opinions about CGC, that I've had to think about, is there is sort of this like perception that they're doing things, the conspiracy theorists do come out, and we'll get too far into that. But this is kind of one of those topics where people kind of do glom onto that a little bit, and they think that it's, some sort of, well, we don't have to, or we can be cheaper about it. And I think there's a kernel of truth to that. But I think the bigger thing is, never assume malice when incompetence is equally as possible of a solution. And I think that really, and incompetence may seem a little harsh, but I'm just saying that I don't think that anything that we don't like about CGC is them going, whole hog and being like, this is how we're going to do it, and we don't care what people think. And I think most of those situations are actually more, hey, they're super busy. Even though they keep raising rates, people keep sending in books at really high numbers. And so when they're trying to be on top of the situation as it is right now, how much can we really assume that they're going to be agile and really want to change things and try to incorporate new processes? Now, I personally think for the money that we pay, that grader notes should be involved. I think that is, something that, even if it's the second grader taking notes on what the first grader said, or if it's the person who's going to eventually encapsulate the book taking notes of just like one or two things, just give me the main two flaws that held it back. I think that would go a long way towards that transparency piece, which is super important to me. But at the same time, I understand it. I get why they're not, reinventing the wheel for them right now. If people did vote with their dollars and started moving towards CBCS more because they're showing them, hey, we want those grader notes, that's why we're submitting more to CBCS or EGS, then that would obviously result in CGC feeling a need to change. But right now, they're just playing catch up. It feels like, they're like firing on all cylinders as far as they're concerned. They probably are aware of a few of their weaknesses. They're probably aware of the perception of their services, but we're not giving them a monetary reason to change, from what I can tell. And until that happens, I don't see why they would, unless they feel like, they have some reason to, or they're finally getting caught up, or, they train all those new people. Then maybe they would roll out some of that stuff as kind of like a breadcrumb for people to follow. But I just don't see them changing anytime soon. And I don't really kind of hold it against them at this point either, which is, it's funny. I don't like that they don't do that, but I also understand it.
Right. Appreciate it. Drew, what your thoughts on the lack of grader notes from CGC? What's their mentality here?
I think Bronze Age hit it on the head. They don't have to. It's been a gripe in the community for years and years and years now. They haven't changed it. They've made graders notes maybe slightly more accessible, but at the same time, they're also still not providing any details. It's like, how can you get a 9.0, a 9.2, or 9.4 that has 0 graders notes? I have a CBCS 9.6 book that has 5 graders notes listed. Like, they get down and granular and tell you exactly why this book is not a 9.8. But I can't find out why my 9.2 CGC book is 9.2 and not a 9.4 or 9.6 or a 9.8. That doesn't make sense. I think, just as he said, as long as everyone continues to send them books and doesn't withhold their services or go to competition, they have no incentive to change. They can just continue on with the status quo until there's some sort of happening, whether that's people stop sending, or I don't know how you can publicly shame them to the point where they do anything or something like that. But it's like there has to be some catalyst for them to change.
They got to hire. We got to hire Ray Donovan to.
There you go. There you go. But I don't think they have a desire to change. I think they're, as has been said, right now they are just 100% focused forward on trying to get through the work that they have. And I don't think innovation or correction of errors is really anything that's front of mind, at least not on something that's an aggravation point for the community versus something that's an actual pain point or breakage in the process.
Right. I just want to say, I love that right now we're approaching this not even from a collector standpoint, but from a business standpoint. Both of your guys' answers and how we're looking at this. And for those watching, I want to encourage you all. This is a huge problem that I see within this community. We as collectors react with emotions, and anytime there's something that we don't like, we, like Bronze was saying, we assume, malicious intent, or we go to some crazy extremes of some types of conspiracy theories. And because this community is heavily on social media, that rhetoric and that dialogue gets regurgitated really easily and really fast. And then it does this, and then it becomes a telephone game, and then it becomes groupthink. We don't and I see the same thing when people talk about like fair market value, of books and like the market. I can tell that people are like throwing out, buzzwords, bubbles and corrections, but they're not really understanding it. They just know that they heard somebody say that somewhere else, and now it's getting regurgitated without an actual, thought-provoking understanding or a real conceptual understanding of what they're talking about. All of this stuff boils down to business and business decisions so much. And I just want to reiterate too that we're not even going to talk about, is CGC manipulating the market tonight? We're not even going there, because there's a better way to dive into these issues and to come to a possible solution, and really, guys, we got to be Rosa Parks, not getting off the bus. And what I mean by that is, I can guarantee you, CGC isn't sitting there saying, hey, we got to give these people a 9.6s to make sure that the values stay up on the secondary market. Or, hey, our buddy is submitting, 100 books. Let's get them all 9.8s. Instead of doing that, I can guarantee you, we can look at more of a situation where when the executives sit down at the board, at the table, they're sitting there saying, how do we maximize our profits and continue to drive our revenues? And it's that simple. Now, I'm not saying that the decisions that they come to are good ones that we're going to agree with, but just like Bronze was saying, it doesn't mean they're inherently malicious. It comes down to business decisions, and they're going to look at the fact that what's making us money, what's hurting us, and what can we change to make more money? And I guarantee you, they're putting all these things on the table. And right now, I can guarantee you, they're putting it. If they're putting out, what can we change? What can bring us more money? And they list better slabs, faster turnaround time. Maybe adding more people at the call center to answer the phones. That can, raising prices, lowering prices, changing the tiers, adding greater notes. I guarantee you that they're looking at, okay, what's next on our list? Adding greater notes. So guys, what do you think? Adding greater notes, is this going to maximize our profits? No? Okay, next.
Yeah, are you going to hire somebody to help ship books out? Or are you going to hire somebody to enter data on graders notes that your customer may or may not use even? Right.
And unfortunately, while it seems like they're not doing any of these things, it seems like, well, they're not upping, turnaround time. They're not, the quality control, all these things. And somebody commented here. Let me see if I could find this comment. Because right here. Vaughn said, I think CGC put profits over quality control until it got out of hand and they knew something had to be done. So what I think is going on now is, I do think there was a point in time where, and whether or not they were even conscious of putting profits over quality, maybe they just didn't understand how to get to that better quality. But I think they realize now that like the foundation cracked in more than one spot, and it's cracking, and they're like in a rush to try to figure out how to fix this. And I think it's going to take a long time before we see any of these things. But I do believe, this is my final statement on this, and I'll let you guys get a final word, and then we'll go into our final talking point of the night. But my final word on this is, I do have faith that the grading industry in general is going to continue to evolve. But I do believe that CGC, even though at times I may feel like they may think they're Rome and they're too big to fail, but even Rome felt right. You know, it's like, I do think they understand that they're going to have to evolve. They're going to have to change things. They can't keep up with their own accepted status quo at some point. But I do think they know that they don't have to rush anything. You know, they're going to continue to maximize their profits and then slowly allocate their resources to where that long-term goal, they can still reach it to where folks are still sending them money, years from now. So I'll let you guys get final word. Drew, final word.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between turning a fishing boat and turning an oil tanker, right? So is your company smaller, you can be more not reactionary. You can react faster, right? You can make bigger, more substantial changes in your direction with less resistance than when you're this big hulking machine that's, as established and just weighty as CGC is. Also, it's not like they were all these years ago. Now you've got investment groups, you've got corporate entities that own them. So all of this stuff that previously, when they were smaller, could just come up to this level of corporate discussion. Well, now it's got to go up past the board, and the CEO here, where you've got to make sure that your people that are cutting the checks and covering the bills are okay with it too. So I think that's a consideration there as well. And I think every business it's in their best interest to have happy customers, and it's just how long does it take the dissatisfaction to reach the ears of the people who can actually make change and address those issues.
Absolutely. Bronze Age.
Yeah, I just would kind of, to reiterate a little bit what Drew's saying there, to kind of echo some of the stuff we've said here. I would really encourage people that do have these issues to continue to be vocal about it, and to continue to kind of let CGC know. And I mean, there's plenty of people, and I totally understand this. There's people that say, hey, we should boycott CGC. And there's people that say, I'm never going to use CGC again. And I get that. That's totally your decision. But you can still be a customer and still get your voice, and your point across. Sometimes that's even heard a little bit more with open ears, because you're saying, hey, I'm going to continue to support you, but if you could improve this, I would appreciate it.
Right.
You can email them. You can say it on social media. You can say it in their comment section. Some of that's going to get through. If enough of us do that, at some point you have to believe that they're going to listen. And people say, oh, well, CGC will never change. You have to remember, some people may not be aware of this either. CGC did do, and is, I think, currently still doing, a pilot program to improve some of their grading processes. They're taking some new submissions, running them through a different test grading process as a test, and seeing how those things go. That's how come you have some people that are submitting books and getting them back within a month without fast track. We're seeing that happen. So we do know that they are interested in trying to improve things. It's exactly like Drew said, trying to turn that oil tanker. They're not as agile as, like, say, probably Tony is at EGS. They're probably going to have to take a little bit more time to sort of turn things around. And you have to weigh that against how much money people are spending with them to continue to submit these books. Do you really expect them to stop everything and change these things that we don't like? Or is it really going to be more of a slow evolution? Yeah. And you just have to kind of look at it practically from a business perspective. That doesn't mean we have to be happy with it, but that's just how it's going to go.
Right. Exactly. Good stuff, guys. All right. We're